Welcome to today's legacy event. Today, we are all about youth-centered in this event. And to do that, and to support this and to do this, I would like to invite all of you to close your eyes or take a lower gaze. Actually, before you do that, please take a comfortable position in your chair, a position of where you feel very relaxed. Yeah, okay. And now, after that, please close your eyes or take a lower gaze. Yeah. So we are going to go on a journey. And on this journey, we are going to go all the way back to your teenage years, or think of yourself as a young adult. Yeah, those moments, those beautiful moments. And now, as you're on this journey, think about someone, someone or that person that was an ally to you, or a mentor, someone that helped you. Like a person who was there for you. Now think about the positive effects that this person had on you. Yeah. Those connections. Now, what was this person about? What made you like this person? Or these effects that this person had on you? Yeah. And now, how did you grow from these effects? These effects, how did you grow from it? These positive effects, how did you grow from it? And finally, what I would like you to think of is, how did this help you to become the person you are today? These positive effects, how did they help you to become the person you are today? Yeah, just for a few seconds, just think about it and reflect. Okay. Now, I'd like to invite you back into this moment. You can open your eyes okay. And now think about this legacy event. But please keep hold on your teenage journeys, what we just kind of went through right now. Thank you very much. And I would like to pass it now to Sally.
Thanks, Kelvin. What a great intro, and really honoring the voices of young people from the start of the session today and helping us to focus on a youth-centered approach in today's session. So that's our first intention for today, and you delivered that well, Kelvin. And the second intention we have is that we want to invoke Paula Freire's culture circle. That's a learning environment in which we're all learning from each other. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all here, and we're keen to have you participate through the session. We have Menti and Padlets, as well as the chat at the bottom of the screen. In case anyone isn't familiar with the chat, sometimes it hides behind the More button. If you haven't used these Menti or Padlet before, Leo was going to put them into the chat, and you'll be able to pick it up from there. So the chat is there through the afternoon. I keep thinking it's morning, but of course it's the afternoon. So it's there for you to participate. So at this stage, though, I'd ask you to look the three buttons in the corner of your video display to include. Can you just check them to make sure that they include the organization you're with, whether it's paid or voluntary, because this will really help the breakout room conversations and connections. And just to acknowledge, when I say voluntary, like the huge role that volunteering plays within the youth sector. We're recording this today, and this will be on YouTube. And we will also share what we harvest from today's session with participants. As I say, it's very much a learning environment for us, and we hope that you feel part of that. We invite you to think about your specific work context as you participate. We're really glad to say there is a great representation from the youth sector here, but also we have broader representation as well, and we hope that that's going to generate some rich thinking and discussion. So the invitation is to jot down notes as you go along and to feedback to us. We'll have a feedback at the end as well. I mentioned Leo there. I'm not actually sure where he is, but he's somewhere in the Zoom. But he's part of the Youth 2030 team, along with Valerie Duffy, Valerie Mollet, myself, Sally Daly, and Shelley Donegan, who is a first-year student of Youth and Community Studies at Maynooth, and we're delighted to have her on placement with us. Our project is funded by Irish Aid, and it allows us to do the work that we do, and we're thankful for that. And also, we're supported here today by the NYCI family. The staff are a dynamic network of collaborators who work across different themed areas to be responsive collectively to the youth sector. So we're delighted to have NYCI in the Zoom today supporting us as well. We're also supported by our member organizations today, and going back to the culture circle, our work depends upon our member orgs, the learning environment that they support and the youth work practice that they are involved with, and we develop our programs in response to that. So really delighted to see so many member orgs here today, and appreciate your participation and also support with some of the breakout rooms as well. So everyone is very welcome to the space today. We are going to host you, but we also invite you to host yourselves. If you need to turn off the screen, please do that. Maybe you'd like to make sure that the view is set to speaker view, so you can make sure you kind of capture the presentations clearly. That's on the top right-hand corner where it says view. You have the option of speaker or gallery view. And just take breaks as you need. We will have a break halfway through, just a short break, but just to get away from our screens. So now I would like to invite Leo to share the screen that offers us the presenters, to get an insight into who the presenters are today. Great, okay, super. So Kelvin Akpolu is the first presenter today. He is a spoken word practitioner and a youth activist. And as Kelvin says, two of the most powerful tools for change making are the pen, stroke keyboard, and words. So Kelvin is brilliant at that. So thanks, Kelvin, for setting us off today with a youth-centered focus. Kathy Rogers then, Program Director of Youth Recs in Canada, and we're delighted to have Kathy here. We've been very inspired by the work of Youth Recs in the last kind of 2 years, and not least because when they talk about evaluation, they say evaluation must be consistent with a youth-centered and youth development approach, and really is also inspired by an anti-oppressive practice and targeting inequality. Kate O'Connor then from Youth Work Tipperary, Ireland is a very experienced global youth worker. We're delighted to have her here today, presenting on her experiences of evaluating her project, because Kate really will show how her learning environment is something that is happening over time. Her evaluation happens over time, and she really responds and works with the young people in her project to support them towards being change makers and to making an impact on the world. Nadia Mossed is with the Youth Work Ireland Cork youth organisation, and she specifically works with Up Cork, the LGBTI group, and she's been working with Christina Ayanku, who is an independent facilitator and creative practitioner, and they have got this really interesting, wonderful youth project that is underpinned by political theatre, and they're going to talk to us about their work in the last 2 years and how they've evaluated that work. And then Hilary Tierney, who is a really key part of the programme at Youth 2030. She is also the academic director of our NUI certificate in global youth work and development education, and a very kind of influential in terms of Hilary has been committed to global youth work practice for years and has been very key to the Youth 2030 project. We're delighted to have Hilary here today, and she's going to kind of come in at the end and just reflect on what's happened in the 2 hours. So delighted to have you here as well, Hilary. So the youth work context of the work that we do. That's a really important foundation part. And when we're talking about evaluation, it happens in a specific learning environment. And that's what we really wanted to foreground today, that youth work is a practice that is a planned program of events. It has a real intention around it. It's the non-formal sector of education, and it works with young people where they're at, supporting them with personal and social development, and it depends upon their voluntary involvement. So that is kind of the context for youth work, and specifically the purpose of youth work around building self-esteem and self-confidence, supporting active citizenship, challenging oppression and inequality, and developing kind of collective action. That's a key part of it as well. And offering, young people to develop knowledge and skills, and really to promote young people's youth voice in decision making. And that's something that we're really, really keen on as well. I mean, to kind of promote that, the idea that young people's expertise is really important and must be consulted, and they must shape policy outcomes. Okay, so then if we're to say, then what is specific about a global youth work approach? Well, we say that it starts from the young person's experience. It must start with the young person's own personal lived experience, and it works out from there. As I said, it's a non-formal education environment, but it is a learning environment. And it's an agenda that's been negotiated with young people. Crucially, it depends upon expertise from the Global South, and it builds knowledge and understanding of the Global South. Then if we talk about the pedagogical journey and the learning culture, it offers pedagogical space for questioning and challenging values and beliefs. And it really is about the emotional connection with that young person's life and what can spark that interest in being part of transformative action. And also helping young people to claim and access their power. So why is evaluation important? Just obviously to improve the work. We want to evaluate so we can see what's working, what we need to do better, where we can learn from. But also importantly, to show youth work as a critical tool of engagement with young people. And specifically in a local and global context, it's a learning environment that can foster change. So that's really key. So then, kind of who is the audience when we talk about internal evaluation, internal or external? So, the funding context is important, and they're obviously a key part of the audience. We're often responding to funders. But then, in the youth sector, we have to consider youth sector funding, and then sort of separate to that, for instance, our program is funded by Irish Aid. And so, some of the constraints and the opportunities that exist within a funding context. Then we have youth sector peers, we have young people, and we have state agencies. So all of this is kind of the evaluation arena for us to consider. Okay, and then just in a minute, Leo is going to give us a link to a Menti in the chat, and we're going to invite you to respond to a question. But for the moment, and just kind of opening up the discussion and thinking about what might legacy mean in an evaluation context. We've called this event today, Rethinking Impact, Legacy and Evaluation in a Global Youth Work Context. What does that mean? So, we're thinking it's about sharing the long-term effects of the work that happens over time. It's planting seeds of change for lifelong learning. And it's very much about the change effect of the work and how it works with the evolving capacities of young people over time. And also, legacy is also around education decision makers on the impact and the legacy of the work. Okay, so that's just setting the scene. And for now, invite Leo to put the link to the Menti. We have it there already, great. And you might just share the Menti as well, Leo, then, so we can see that. So, like I said at the start, please, if you have a problem with accessing the Menti code, don't worry. You can also put it into the chat. The question is, what does the word legacy mean for me, for you, in the work that you do? So we want to get the context from you and from your work. Okay, we've got how we are remembered, reputation, impact, okay. What will people remember? Tracking previous work. Like I say, if you can't access the Menti, please just put it in the chat. We're delighted to get feedback from whatever source it comes from. Legacy means status quo from long-term history. Okay. Storytelling. Leaving a long-term impact. Great. The difference that has been made. Achievements in life. What is written in my obituary that motivates others to act? Interesting. It's a very considered response. Having a home for creative children and young people. What's left when we're finished? What people remember? Learning. Okay. The change we help to create. Great. Making a difference in the lives around us. Great. Super. Yeah. Wonderful. Okay. We will, as I say, anything that we harvest today, we will share afterwards, and that's just really to set the scene for the idea. Like, what does a legacy mean to you in your work? And just to encourage you to, think about that, reflect on that today as we go this afternoon as we go through. So for now, I would love to invite Kathy to present her presentation. Kathy from YouthRex Canada, who has been very influential in our work in the last kind of year. We've been really interested, year and a half, to see how they are, the context for the evaluation work they do, where it's come from, and the sort of change effect that they are seeing in their work. So, so Kathy is here with Khadija as well, another colleague, and we're delighted to have you here. So the floor is yours now, Kathy.
Hi everyone. It's morning here. I am in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. As Sally mentioned, my colleague Khadija is here. We are here from YouthRex, or Youth Research and Evaluation Exchange. My name is Katie. It looks like Kathy. It's Katie. I am the program director at YouthRex. And before I start, I have a few slides. I'm going to try to keep my comments brief. I'm going to try to connect a few dots between youth work in an Ontario or Canadian context, sort of how YouthRex came to be in that context, and specifically speaking to how we approach evaluation. But I'm going to share a few links in the chat box that you may want to reference. I'm just going to share them all in one message. And I hope that works. Yeah. And then if you want to reference any of the links either before or after the presentation, that would be great. Perfect. So as I said, YouthRex is focused on supporting the Ontario youth sector. Ontario is a province in Canada, but I think that the ways that we understand and approach and practice youth work across the province and across the country are very similar. And increasingly, this work is guided by a commitment to meaningful youth engagement. We've started talking about even youth adult allyship. So how can adults move from engaging young people to actually becoming allies? And then of course, working towards ensuring that youth are actually leading the design, the development, and the evaluation of youth programming. As Sally mentioned, youth work is increasingly in our context moving towards an anti-oppressive and anti-racist approach. These practices may vary. Ontario is a very large geographic region, and there is incredible diversity across communities, between the north and the south, across urban versus rural versus suburban. The needs of young people may change. Obviously, young people have intersecting identities. And so really the ways in which folks practice can be dependent upon their context, their community, and also their access to tools and resources. But there is an underlying commitment, as you all know, to adhering to and advancing principles of equity and social justice in the work. In Ontario or in Canada more broadly, youth work as a practice, as a profession, is really broadly defined. Youth workers, we know, are often young people themselves. There are practitioners with a lot of different academic practice and lived experience. We do have professional accreditation. It's provincially based. So we have folks who are registered social workers or social service workers. We have folks who are child and youth workers. But there has been a lot of discussion about the benefits and the challenges of professional accreditation among youth workers. And of course, some youth workers are working multiple contracts, some youth workers are volunteering. So it's really, really broadly defined, and we try to hold that broad definition when we're working with the youth serving sector. But I think Sally's definition really resonated in terms of how we think about youth work and how youth workers are engaging with young people. So in 2018, YouthRex released some results from some research that we did, because it's one thing to know about the demographics, it's another thing to know about the stories. And so we really wanted to hear from youth workers about how they are experiencing their profession. And so we found out a few things. We did 7 focus groups with 58 frontline youth workers in 5 cities to try to get a little bit of variation in terms of geographic representation and representation in terms of where folks work. And we sort of discovered 4 main themes. One, of course, as it's laid out on the slide, but the fact that youth workers' personal and intersecting identities are not seen to them as being separate from their professional identity. So they're bringing their full selves to their work. And in fact, their full selves, that, bringing your full self to your work as a youth worker is actually a resource, it's an asset. They also shared that they feel like youth work is numbers work. There's so much pressure to report numbers, targets, goals. There's a lot of administrative work. There's a lot of reporting. And sometimes that renders some of the work that they do invisible. And that's part of our attempt to really integrate evaluation practices and a diversity of practices into the work, because then we can make sure we're capturing the stories that aren't being told. They also reported that their approach to youth work, they saw it as rule bending work. Youth are embedded within systems that are oppressive, that are unjust. And so in order to support those young people, sometimes youth workers are bending the rules. Sometimes the work is unauthorized. And the last piece that they shared is just the marginality of youth work and the invisibility of youth workers. So there is a lot of diversity, as I mentioned, in the sector. Youth work is often devalued. It's often precarious. Sometimes youth workers have to piece together multiple contract-based jobs. And this precarious and insecure labor market is really stratified by race, gender, and sexuality. So just wanted to give a little bit more context of what youth work looks like in our sector. A little bit about YouthRex. So Youth Research and Evaluation Exchange was launched in 2014. We're funded by the Ontario government. We were initially funded because the Ministry at the time of Children and Youth Services, which is now the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services, had released a strategic framework called Stepping Up. They outlined 7 themes and 20 outcomes, and they wanted to really inform and align the work of the youth serving sector. And they saw YouthRex's role as supporting evidence-informed work and also supporting programs in evaluating their outcomes so that we could have this sort of broader approach to improving youth well-being across Ontario. So our vision is in Ontario, where shared knowledge is transformed into positive impact for all youth. And our mission is to make research and evaluation accessible and relevant to Ontario's youth sector. And we do that in a few ways. And we work with a variety of stakeholders, as I'm sure most folks do. Our target is grassroots youth organizations. So those grassroots youth workers who may not have the supports that they need to do some of the work that we're talking about today, but of course that also includes youth and a variety of stakeholders across the sector, policy and decision makers, academics and researchers, collectives, larger organizations, and funders as well. Our principles, Sally sort of spoke to this in her lovely introduction, that we really try to embrace a critical positive youth development framework. So that means that we are really looking at youth strengths, we're looking at assets. At YouthRex, we don't talk about at-risk youth, which is a term that's commonly used by funders. We acknowledge the impact of isms, so we recognize that there are oppressive systemic and societal forces that are constraining youth and creating barriers for young people. And we tried to connect those dots and make those connections between systems barriers and individual barriers. We ground our work in community and context. We think that's really, really important. And we use multiple approaches. So those are some of the principles that underpin the work. And we do our work across sort of 3 pillars: knowledge exchange, which is basically curating and creating resources for youth workers, connecting evidence to practice. Youth Rec Ed, that's about the capacity building work. So offering certificates, offering workshops, creating space for youth workers to learn and connect and share with one another. And then our research and evaluation work, which really comprises our youth program support. So really supporting youth programs, working one-on-one on design, development, and evaluation of youth programs. In 2016, we did a research study and we called it Beyond Measure. We were trying to get a sense of, what does evaluation mean to the youth sector? And we came up with sort of 5 takeaways. There's an extensive report that I've shared the link to because we did do a survey of 197 organizations, 60 key informant interviews, but we were able to pull away, oops, I jumped ahead there, sorry. We were able to pull away 5 key learnings, 5 key messages, 5 key takeaways. So what we learned is that the youth sector understands the benefits of evaluation. They're enthusiastic about it. So that was a great place to start. But we did see that there was an urgent need for more efficient and less burdensome processes and practices, as you can imagine. And we really discovered that the sector as a whole, but also youth programs, youth serving organizations were missing opportunities for evaluation to inform their learning and their strategic planning. We also discovered that there was general consensus, of course, that youth involvement in evaluation is actually important for their well-being, but that it was still a work in progress. Programs weren't really sure how to do that effectively. And then we realized that youth serving organizations, that organizations in the youth sector required a distinct understanding and approach to evaluation. And so that is really what led and what informed the development of our framework for evaluating youth well-being. So this is Youth Rex's evaluation framework. And it's very comprehensive. There are 7 steps, there are 3 phases. It can be resource and labor intensive to work with a youth program from start to finish, but we really wanted to expand understandings of evaluation with this model, with this framework. We wanted to expand definitions of evaluation. We wanted to expand the inclusivity of evaluation. We wanted to do that by helping folks rethink the language of evaluation. So including what we call the discovery phase, which actually allows you to kind of go back and check in with your program, understanding your program, doing that important work of sort of not self-discovery at an individual level, but self-discovery at a programmatic level. We wanted to expand the sense of who can do evaluation. So many folks think that evaluation is something that can only be done by researchers and academics. There's a lot of jargon involved. It feels very intensive in a way that feels inaccessible. So we wanted evaluation to feel more participatory, and we wanted to find ways to engage young people more meaningfully at all phases of this evaluation framework. We also wanted to expand why we do evaluation. So evaluation is not just about proving, it's also about improving. It is about developing a culture of learning. And it's not just about the numbers work that youth workers, the youth workers are feeling like there's such pressure to report on the numbers. And in fact, we wanted to create space for evaluation to be more about, improving our work, amplifying the voices of those who are participating in programs, but also leading those programs, giving us the tools to tell critical stories that can work towards change. So the stories that we tell from our work can both improve programming, but also have an advocacy edge that can result in change at the levels of community and at higher levels across the youth serving sector. And then also we wanted to expand how we do evaluation. So recognizing that there are politics to evaluation. When you're approaching evaluation, you need to ensure that you have a values-oriented approach. And that's why the discovery phase is so important, to really try to align values. And then, of course, expanding access to evaluation was important to us in creating this framework. And we initially, would work with youth programs through all 7 steps. And after some time, we realized like not every youth program is ready to embark on this kind of journey. And so we started to provide more customized supports that would allow a youth program to come to us and say, we want to develop a logic model, or we're in the middle of an evaluation, but we need some support in designing a focus group or a survey. And then we would take on that work to support them wherever they may be in this journey, while also making sure that we're consistently going back to that idea of a values-oriented approach, and also making sure that we're continuing to expand folks' understanding of what evaluation can be, who can do it, how we do it, and why we do it. That's really, really important to us. And the last phase of our framework connects obviously to the topic for this conversation today, because it is all about legacy. And it is about contributing to a culture of learning. A lot of folks had definitions about legacy that really resonated for me personally, but also from an evaluation standpoint. But I think one thing that we try to reiterate to the folks with whom we work is legacy doesn't mean the work is done. So the legacy can also be to inform and continue improving the work. So, we talk about learning from evidence, and at YouthRex, we really try to disrupt hierarchies of knowledge. So we really want to emphasize that evidence can come from academia and research, but it can also come from practitioners, and it can come from lived experience. That's really important. And so when we talk about learning from evidence, we may seek evidence to inform how we design our programs, how we develop our programs. We may evaluate our programs, and the evidence we generate from the evaluation can go back in how we're designing and developing the programs. So I've shared some questions here around these last two steps of our framework that I think sort of speak to, obviously impact, lasting impact, which folks shared as being, their understandings of what legacy could mean. And I think, it's also about figuring out ways to share that story internally, to build evaluation practices into everything that we do, so that it becomes a part of how we work and how we understand the work. And when we think about data, it's not just quantitative data, it's also qualitative data. But all of that data, depending on the choices we make, it's not often objective. That's why having a values-oriented approach is so important, because we're making decisions. We're making decisions about the questions we ask. And Khadija can speak more about this, but we're in the process of helping organizations think through, when they're capturing demographic information, what are they asking about when they're asking about sex versus gender? Why do they need to know that information? Sometimes funders use binaries that we then feel like we need to adhere to, but what do we need to know in order to do our work, in order to meet the needs of young people? What questions do we need to ask? We have had programs that have, been focused on safety and community well-being, and there have been questions around how do we involve the police in our programmatic spaces in order to achieve those goals. And we have to question, are those strategies that will actually result in the outcomes that you want to achieve? Because we know that the evidence tells us that, in fact, having police in youth program spaces may not actually achieve a sense of safety or security for young people. So again, just trying to go back to that values-oriented approach. And then when we come to the other side of an evaluation, hopefully the questions that we've intentionally asked and the data that we've collected, whether through surveys or focus groups, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, can really inform stories for action. And so that we're communicating the legacy of the work and helping folks understand the real story of our program as we define it. So it's about processes and outcomes, and it's also about the complexity and dynamism of the work itself. And so even when we get to the stage of our work, the work itself is not really done. And I'll just my last slide just outlines sort of our service pledge to programs that again speaks to how we approach evaluation and how we approach youth work and how we approach supporting youth workers. And I think this will resonate probably with a lot of the ways that you all practice, but we really try to understand a youth program's capacity and start there. So starting where people are at, being responsive to their needs, working collaboratively is really important. Adhering to high ethical standards, and of course, meaningfully engaging youth. That's something that we really come back to time and time again. Committing fully to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And then of course, listening and listening more. It's so much about conversations and really asking questions. If a youth program wants evidence to support their work with, as they refer to them, at-risk youth who are abusing substances, we may come back and present some evidence from a harm reduction approach, and speak to all of the forces at play that may put youth in positions where they are more at risk, but recognizing that they are not inherently at risk, and also talking about substance use as opposed to abuse. So using language, asking questions to try to really surface some of the biases we have, surface our values, and really orient the work towards long-term impact in improving youth well-being. I think that's the last slide. I hope that I covered a lot, but I hope that I touched on what folks were interested in learning from our work. So thank you again so much for having us here.
Thanks, Katie, that's great. And I suppose just maybe one question, and I invite people to also put questions in the chat, but really when you kind of started, I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago, you were really implementing a whole program across the sector. So that was a really significant piece of work. And from where you started then to where you are now, what kind of are the differences? Have you seen the progress?
In terms of the sector as a whole?
Yeah.
I mean, we anecdotally, and I think that there is more and more a recognition of the significance of evaluation. Even though we knew it was important before, like we have a lot of requests for support. A lot of folks are reaching out and understanding sort of the nuance, and also just, in terms of their own capacity building. And that's something that, we try to do. We have certificates and workshops designed specifically to address issues that young people face and try to, support the development of practice skills. But around the capacity building piece, so we have 2 certificates, as you know, Sally, on evaluation, program evaluation. We have shorter samplers that we offer around evaluation. People really want to build their capacity, because we know in the youth sector, oftentimes programs do not have funding for evaluation, and they do not have the capacity on their own teams. So what we try to do, they reach out to us when they need that support, but then we're trying to sort of mentor and support those folks to then take on the work themselves. So I think there is more of a recognition around that. I think it can be challenging working with funders, and that's something that, what we're undertaking in the next year is some original research, again, with youth workers and with youth, because we really want to pick up that piece around the ways in which youth workers themselves are constrained, because if we have a government that's committed to certain outcomes and to improving youth well-being, then we need to think about the ways that we're supporting youth workers to do that. So we do advocate on issues that impact youth, but we're also like very much, in service of youth workers. So yeah, I think that there's been a real shift around, moving towards equity-informed work. I think there's been some demystifying of what evidence-informed practice means, and some greater uptake around capacity for evaluation. But in terms of those broader sector impacts, we only know that now anecdotally from our feedback forms and from our conversations, and but we hope that we'll have a better sense of where the youth sector is at in 2021, which we can compare back to our work.
That's actually great, Katie, because you're addressing one of the questions that was asked in the chat, and I suppose it's probably a question we all have around funding being, evaluation responses being informed by funders, and wanting to move away from that. And you mentioned research there. I know for us in the youth sector, we're very keen to put more money into research to kind of develop areas and show the need for doing evaluation differently, for instance. So thank you, that's a great response, actually. Does anybody have any more questions actually for Katie at this moment? It was great, Katie, fair play to you. You packed it all in, and your work is so, at this stage, your program is responding across the vast landscape of Ontario, as you said before, with a lot of very specific needs across the landmass. So you've had to really create bespoke responses as well as kind of overarching responses. And just there's a question here about, you provide a lot of supports online and had been doing so before COVID. How have your youth workers and youth organizations used this online opportunity?
Yeah, that is something we've definitely seen over the last year. I mean, we had certificates online, and we had offerings. We used to host, regular webinars. We've increased the frequency of all of that, and the uptake has been huge. There's a real desire, I think, to learn. I mean, one of the things we know about youth workers in Ontario is that they're often isolated in their work. So it may be that they're the only youth worker at an agency, or they may be the only youth worker in their community. And so, we were always trying to find ways to bring people together. And given the size of Ontario, online opportunities seem to be the way to do it. But we have definitely seen more and more youth workers accessing our supports. We launched a new certificate at the end of February on centering Black youth well-being, and over 2,000 people have registered and are now learning with us. And that number is it's unprecedented for us in terms of a certificate in that short period of time. So there is really a hunger for that. And what we've been trying to do at YouthRex is we've tried to offer more online supports and thinking through how we do that effectively, and then supporting youth workers to do that with youth, which is a little bit different. But as I said, a lot of youth workers are young people too. So we're sort of navigating a lot of the same, I mean, everyone is, but in terms of the supports we provide, the programming provide really sort of, I think, mirrors what youth programs are struggling with right now in terms of reaching youth. But there's an appetite, and people are really, really responsive to more and more of the work that we're doing being online. And that's something that we'll take away and continue doing, I think, regardless of what happens over the next year.
Oh, brilliant. And that's certainly how we kind of encountered you through your e-learning platform, which is so accessible and so responsive. So that's what really left an impression with us, and how youth-centered your approach is, and how your values are very clearly come through with that. So Katie, we're actually going to move on now, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I'm delighted to be here today talking about on behalf of Youth Work Ireland Tipperary and our global programme. So I just thought I would kind of set the scene, give you a little bit of background to Youth Work Ireland Tipperary. So I suppose we are based in the heart of Tipperary, and we also work into East Limerick. We have 20 different projects across the organisation, from 7 key youth projects, but we also have a resettlement project. There's an ability program. There's family support programs. So we're actually quite wide ranged. It's a complex jigsaw. There's over 50 staff, around 20 youth and community workers, with 20 staff who are support staff on a CE scheme, to obviously some management and that. So we're a big team, and we're also based geographically across 7 towns and 14 villages across Tipperary and into East Limerick. So I would always say it takes me 2 hours to get from one side of the county to the other, where we have clubs and projects based. We would be quicker to get to Cork or Dublin than we would be to get around our geographical area that we're based in. And I suppose back in 2016, there was passion within the organisation to introduce a development education programme. So we're just over 5 years working on having development education in the organisation and focusing on global youth work. And it has been a stepping stone, and it has been grown over the years. And I suppose that's the thing, nothing, Rome wasn't built in a day, and, it is taking those step by step. So to where we are now, where it is getting to the point where we can really get the sense that global youth work is truly being embedded across the whole organisation. Currently, we would be engaging up to 300 to 400 young people yearly in our global programme. And I suppose the 4 key areas for us is about creating awareness for the young people around the topics that are of interest to them, that are based in their reality and they're coming from their own environment, and helping them with, I suppose, a local and global lens to get a great understanding of the issue, and linking the local and global connections together, and also helping them be empowered to take action. And a fundamental tool that we would use in this, in helping the young people explore, I suppose, how globalization is affecting their lives, is the Sustainable Development Goals and the various UN days. So they're a big feature in our global programme. And I suppose the other thing for us is really in our global program, it's about the how is just as important as what we do. And that whether it's involving debates, game designs, getting involved in a campaign, creative arts, video making, quotes, statistics, or photos or stimulation games, that's really important for what we're doing, just as important as, the how is just as important as the what. And I suppose probably into the third year of the program, kind of into the end of 2018 and start of 2019, we realized, it was time to stop and kind of figure out what was really working well and what wasn't, and how could we grow it. And I suppose that's when we started to look at different evaluation tools, besides just the evaluation you would do for your funder, but actually really exploring what was working well. And we started to use focus groups and working with the young people to really, find their voice and give us back, some concrete feedback on the program, and also working really keenly with our youth workers and having like a focus group with our youth workers to, why was there only certain projects taken up on it? And I suppose sometimes we can come back to back to the funders, and they say, well, where our funding means we're working with young people at risk, or we're focusing on young people in hardcore level 2 or 3 more so than general young people at hardcore level 1. Or we would also work with young people who would have high ACEs scores, so that's adverse childhood experiences, which I'm sure you're all well aware of. So sometimes it was kind of felt like what global youth work was offering in the global program wasn't fitting all the needs of all of our young people. And I suppose that's where we wanted to turn things around and show that by engaging with our global program, that you could see the real benefits of global youth work, and that really is just good youth work at practice, and trying to connect for the youth workers, the outcomes of young people engaging through the how, would help to meet, say, the seven proximal outcomes for young people for their social and personal development. And so I suppose with those focus groups, I can take you through an example of our social media campaign. So we ran our first social media campaign. So this would have come out of our focus groups in the end of 2018, start of 2019, that the young people really wanted their voices heard. They wanted to have control of something that they could speak out on and show where their passion was. And at our AGM at the start of 2019, all the young people present voted on the topic that they wanted us as an organisation to speak out on. And then the junior board came together, it was 10 members, and they designed a Let's Get Real About Poverty campaign. And we got, it was our first time doing it, and we felt we got great reach. We got 5 youth projects across the organisation involved. 7 youth workers took on the challenge that the young people set for us, and I was one of the 7, to live on €2 a day for 5 days. So you can see on the table there, I even let the junior board buy my food for the week. So in the picture there, you can see what they bought me, and I had to live on for a week. And it was to highlight what might it be like in reality if you are living, in poverty. And they picked the figure of €2 because, extreme poverty would be considered living under $1. So they kind of rounded it up to €2. So it'd be a little, I suppose they thought it was a little easier for us, giving us a €2 a day. And they designed a workshop to do in person for the younger youth members, and we run it across our social media campaign. And it was really big at the time, and we felt we learned so much. But part of that thing was then to lead into evaluation of it, and knowing it came from evaluation and from focus groups, we wanted to look at, when we really examined this, okay, it was brilliant. We got 75 young people involved, or 5 projects, or 7 youth workers. Where were the gaps? How did we not get the whole reach of the organisation? What could we have done differently in terms of growing it, of reaching wider within our own organisation, if the campaign is also supposed to have an external part, but we were missing something internally. So we went back to the focus group model and really kind of took into, with the youth workers and the young people, to where could we go with it. And what kind of came across from the youth workers was, you know, some people said, oh, it didn't fit with the young people I worked with, or it wasn't quite, it didn't quite fit. So then when we came to look at the campaign the following year, this became a wider debate, because we wanted to do another campaign, and the young people all got quite vocal about what they wanted the campaign to be about. And it was trying to, you know, we had the idea of inequalities that young people face. There was an idea of a campaign around racism and Black Lives Matter and climate action. And in the end, what we did was we came up with a campaign that came across many areas that young people felt were affecting their lives in Tipperary, in Ireland and globally in 2020. And the variety of topics helped us then reach it across all the different projects, because, you know, we've workers working with young people who are homeless, say, for example, in Youth Work Ireland Tipperary, and we were able to include their voices through a blog, you know. So, but then other young people from the project did a solidarity sit down. So we started to draw the connections across our different projects in the organization of young people who were affected by the different issues in 2020. And it led to a much greater engagement. So we turned from having 7 youth workers involved in the first campaign to 41 of our staff got actively involved in the campaign in the second year. We grew the number of young people, the number of projects, and also our reach. But that only grew because of the focus groups, because of going back and asking sometimes the hard questions, and, you know, being ready to hear some of the constructive feedback, and really letting them know that you're really open to that, because we want to make it better. We get a further reach. And I suppose the other thing I was saying was, we evaluated our training for our youth workers, because we have had different resources over the few years that have been created in conjunction with young people and by young people solely, and kind of trying to see where we were coming from when we'd have a training with youth workers and they'd go away with the resource. You know, and you might have a 50% take up of them rolling something out of the training, to in 2020, we did training with our youth workers in the start of February. And, you know, within 3 months, when we did a check back in, every single project had engaged with some activity from the SDG backpack, which the training was about. So we could see, by taking the feedback from the training of how to change it around, make the training stronger and more what the youth workers wanted and needed, to ensure that they could walk away with the confidence to use the activities in their projects. And then I suppose the great thing is, through creating this learning environment, we've been able to really witness change for the young people involved. And, you know, they're more than just a number or a stat to the funder, but, you know, through creating that environment where they could find their place with other young people who are interested in similar topics to them. They could start to find their confidence and grow their own voice, and through the action element, helping them to find their own personal power. And, you know, through the campaign, like for one example, you know, when we were doing the second campaign and we had the young people in the room, we had, you know, one young person who I'd been working with for a few years, who suddenly was wanted to speak about, we were just touching on the topic of racism, and he got really passionate about his experience as being a traveller in Ireland and the discrimination that he has faced. And, you know, and he was so passionate that should be so included in the campaign, that, you know, it was for the first time seeing him use his voice. And, you know, when we were for equality, a young person going, that's what that is, but that's my life, and helping her create the correlation between, you know, her reality and how, you know, finding her place in that, and giving her the confidence to speak out and to engage with action for change. You know, I can tell other stories of where I've been at an event with a young person who said, you know, I'm no Greta Thunberg, why am I here, you know, to within a year, you know, her standing up, being passionate about homelessness and poverty in Tipperary, and leading a solidarity sit down campaign. And we would have had another young person who would, you know, be very high on the ACEs scores. A lot of the young people we would work with would have high ACEs, or would have different, you know, educational challenges. And you know, seeing them grow, and one who was is in university now, studying to be a primary school teacher, and is passionate that they want to learn more in this area of development education and bring this into their future career. So I suppose sometimes you never know the impact of creating the space for the young person to find their voice, to find their passion, and to find their power. And just, I suppose, in terms of Youth Work Ireland Tipperary, the other key thing for us that has come out of the evaluations that we've been doing and the focus groups is really about trying to embed it as just simply good youth work practice. This is something that, whether, you know, whoever's in the organisation, that this is firmly embedded, it's there, and we've put in a policy, but, you know, we wanted to go further, and so we're just in the process of I suppose, consultating and evaluating to see would this kind of idea of our roadmap work. And it's about the key of putting in youth-led engagement and innovation, and the fostering and exploring of prioritising global youth work as something that should happen across every project, because it's a great way to engage young people in their realities that they're facing today in 2021. Spotlighting and growing key initiatives, whether from our own organisation or from the sector in Ireland or wider afield. We love the Troker Game Changers competition for a great way, a tool for us to engage young people in the process of creativity, youth-led engagement on the SDGs. Obviously collecting in with networks and the learning and sharing, which is so valuable through NYCI and the Youth 2030 team, and really just trying to amplify and support best practice in action. And, you know, that's what our hope is. And I suppose I just feel very lucky that I get a job where I get to, you know, be passionate about a topic I'm really interested in, and that I get to bring it to life for the young people that I work with in Youth Work Ireland Tipperary. So thanks very much.
That's great, Kate, really. And I think you talk about the learning environment that you have created, and how this happened over time. It hasn't happened overnight, but an intentional commitment by Youth Work Tipperary, and with you leading that work over time, has created that. There are questions about social media and how and kind of the relationship with you know, change, and how you demonstrate that it actually impacts towards affecting change. And we might take that question, actually that question is a really great question for us to, if we consider this a research space in a learning environment, we might, you know, harvest it for that. Is there anything specific you want to say about that?
I suppose in terms of being zoomed out, what we did was we went back to our backpack of SDG activities and saw what could we modify, what could we change to make it new, engaging, and looking at whatever creativity methods we could to engage them. Like tomorrow night, I'm running a fair trade chocolate quiz on Zoom, which I have already a really great take up. So I suppose it was trying to use what we could to make it as engaging and fun. And that social media campaign, the second one, was, you know, it was designed completely through COVID, and we had our challenges, but I could maybe think about it and give you a stronger answer at a future point.
No, like I say, I think it's a great question, and we'd love to maybe develop that question more. Everyone's saying, you know, well done, Kate. And just to acknowledge that yesterday, Youth Work Ireland Tipperary were awarded Irish Aid funding to continue this work in the next 2 years. So well done, Kate, and to everyone in Tipperary. It's really inspiring, and you show how this is a planned intention over a period of years, and then, you know, the learning environment is created, and, you know, and that's all part of the process. So Kate, thanks so much. Great to have you presenting. Really inspiring work, Kate, honestly. And then, so thank you, Kate. And we're now going to invite Nadia and Christina to present on their work with the Up Cork LGBTI group based in Cork.
Thank you, Sally.
Thank you.
Really delighted to be here. I'm going to share my screen now to see if it's okay here.
So just a little bit to tell you about, maybe just to set a little bit the scene on who are we in this context. So it's a youth group that is located in Cork, as the title says, up Cork, right? And it's an LGBTI plus youth project. So what do we do in this group? Well, believe it or not, we don't always talk about gender. We don't always talk about STIs. We don't always talk about anything that is related to gender identity, gender expression, or any. It's not the major point that we focus on, but it has highest importance, of course, for the young people. So what we do is actually to make sure that we address all that isolation kind of stigma on that, and that minority stress that the LGBTI young people really experience. But it does really contribute to poor mental health. So what we try to do is actually to create this kind of social space where they can actually get there and then, talk freely about their identity and their gender identity as well. So 2018, just to bring you how this project came about, back 2018 and just before that, the group actually participated in consultation when it came to the national strategy for the LGBTI youth in Ireland. It was the first of its kind. And they were actually quite happy to participate in that consultation. And then we were invited in Dublin, and it was a fabulous day. Everybody was so like buzzing. And if you see the colors behind me, the reason why I'm putting this picture is kind of maybe sore to the eye for some, and I apologize, but this brings us a little bit the energy of the young people in the space, because they are buzzing. So this is really to just put you in that, setting the scene, really. So how did it go by? Yes, so they were happy about that fabulous day, came back to Cork, and there was some discussion in the room about really, a strategy, again, what is going to change. So we decided, okay, let's really look at it. And we had a discourse analysis about the strategy itself, where we spontaneously created this workshop whereby the young people were actually looking at each point of the strategy and kind of evaluating what is it really happening in the reality. So 2018, and then by 2019, they started writing some kind of poem at the start. And in parallel, I was in touch with Christina, who is a fabulous person when it comes to the theater of the oppressed. So we thought, yeah, maybe I proposed theater to the young people. They said no at the start. I said, okay, we do something else. But then somehow they came back and they say, you know what, Nadia, let's try that, the playwriting. I say, okay, well, okay. So then we moved to this space for theater. But the first reason of the project was to bring an evaluation on the national strategy. So the whole project was to write a play to evaluate the national strategy and the outcome of it. And well, things change, as you will see in all the scenes that we prepared for you. And I give it back to Christina.
Thank you, Nadia. So I'm going to talk a bit about the rationale of the project and some insights that are coming from creative writing and specifically from playwriting. And I think it's very important to mention, as a creative writing facilitator, there's a common ground there with youth work. It is about the transfer of power. So participants in a playwriting or creative writing project, they are active participants. They are not participants, they are vessels, So creative writing is a place where you can get active and think about issues that are concerning you. So it is something I really wanted to mention about this transfer of power that actually is important in how creative writing can facilitate that, and it's common to youth work. So when it comes to our aims and our objectives, so the major aim, the overall aim, was to go and to provide a space and tools for young people to negotiate the relationship between self and society. So that was the overall aim, and the objectives were catering for this. And as Nadia said, they were related to this evaluation and creating narratives regarding the LGBT youth strategy. So how some of the measures or some of the thinking behind that impacts young people, and how this can be seen in their lived experience. So they were exploring this as main points. As stages, we started in October 2019 in person, of course. We had few meetings, and there, like in March, of course, we had to interrupt. We regrouped in June and July online. So the work kind of started to become not different, but of course we adapted to the tools, and there are some insights that we're gonna say about how this work changed through online tools. What we did till June and July, we had managed to put a draft of the play, and in this draft you can see the exploration of these issues that are important to young people. So June, July, from October to July, it was the exploration and trying to find those key messages and the vision, the collective vision of young people. So for now, we have a play. I'm really proud of the work that young people did. So it's a collective play. It's a play that is started from their experiences, and it's a play that is going to be read by students in UCC Cork, Nadia?
Yeah, it's the School of Music, the first year student.
Yeah.
So yeah, excellent. So keeping in mind that aim, we go to move to scene one, the act one, really. So keeping in mind the scene that is about really unpacking with the young people at the individual, the local, the national, the global level, and really to implement, it's about the implementation of the frame, the frames and the dehumanization that some may cause. So the evaluation here is seen as the tool to redistribute power. And let's look at how do we measure impact. Well, first of all, we thought, well, the first thing that we do, because we are fully engaging with the young people, it's actually to look at witnessing the change through different here tools, but firstly through observation. Before I talk about that, I just want to raise one thing, is that we really at all time are trying to raise awareness of the young people to comprehend their agency. But it's also connecting their circumstances to other, and really to invite empathy and hope in that space. So this is what we look at when we are working with them. Yeah, there is as well a higher awareness on their own situateness within the global frame, really, when you and they are connecting to they have this social interaction, but as well they found this voice where they can speak their views. They are not feeling not invited. They feel actually ownership over the process itself because it's creative. So they are contributing by leading, but also by collaborating within others at times. It does always enhance the writing. They relate to the others as well in their writing, and the ones that are not present. And this is what is very good, is because there is this creation of space where let's invite the voice of the one who is not here to speak and to be represented in the play. And this is as well something that is actually witnessed as an impact through our observation. And I hand it to you, Christina, for the evidence.
So when it comes to evidence in evaluation, we always think in youth work, we think a lot about the quantitative, qualitative, but here we actually our emphasis is on the qualitative and evidence as recorded feedback, as storytelling. So we are trying to go a bit deeper. And it's related to what Nadia said also regarding our observations. So when you witness change in behavior, attitude, skills, when we think about the attitudes and the skills, and in the storytelling ways, it's how they use the language, how they make sense and they process their experiences, their connection with the society, with communities, with the world. So I think when it comes to evidence, we should look more into let's say, the storytelling focus group pieces as well. The evidence is also in the response to tasks. So what we worked on, and I think it's also meaningful to say the play itself. So what the play is all about, how characters are interacting between themselves, how they are managing their worlds, how they are connecting with the world outside them, how they're aware of what decisions they had made and their transitions and their transformation. So the play itself, it's a way to witness this change, because we see the progress in that. A long time in our process, we measured, we took the snapshot of what's happening to them, and I think it's relevant to look on how they respond to some of the questions. What I said about how they make sense and of what's happening, and how they how they relate to their learning experience as well. So we looked on the experience on creative writing journey. How about to actually tackle the issues that are very close to themselves, and it can get very, like, at some point can get painful, can be we worked on that as well, you know, how to manage that relationship with the issues that are very close to their home. And also we looked about on how is it for them to actually write collectively, because it's very differently to actually work on a 30-page play in a collective manner. It's something that I'm so proud. Like, I just need to say that I'm really proud of their work, because usually it's something so hard to manage to put all the key messages there and to have that horizontal approach into the work, you know.
So it's not the full, it doesn't give the full picture as impact goes beyond the project itself. We had one person saying to us, well, actually that creative writing helped me in my English preparing for Living Search. So for instance, is as well outside is helping them in their communities. Someone wants to get engaged in that drama group in another space. So there is a complexity around it when you want to evaluate it. So we witness this kind of impact that is outside the project life, when it has a specific starting date and end date. So it increased the participation of the young people in other creative project that we have happening in parallel. So they wanted to get involved in other things. Some of them knew steadily what is it that they really want to do. It actually helped one young person to decide for what subject they may go for, that is relevant to them. So it helps in so many different spaces. It's important to understand here that the evaluation of a project, it's arguably to be measured in the repercussion it has on subsequent engagement. and higher motivation as well. So it might generate much higher motivation than a new project will have done if that project was not happening before. So the impact is actually across time, and what we do is always planting seeds. We are like mad people going around and planting seed in here, and we never know which one is going to take, but when it takes, we are there to help out, to make sure. And this is why evaluation, this project, for instance, itself is a seed for something else. Another project. So for instance, some young people were talking about environmental justice that we spoke about when we were doing this project. So it as well mirror really the framework itself as a global youth work, really, because it's never a done job. As the process of consciousness raising is always ongoing. And because of its nature, it might, and probably, let's face it, should create uncomfortable those spaces. But we see them really as always being spaces where we plant seed. So yes, the picture is not full, and we can actually, when we have a project, we could keep evaluating that project, what it brought, way longer after the project is finished.
So I'm looking at flexibility in the objectives as methodology. So this is somehow connecting to why we actually evaluate and measure. So this is about us and about learning and shaping the practice. So when I say about flexibility in the objectives, we think about the aim. The aim is not changing, but the objectives, the ways that we are going about that are changing, because it is related to our ongoing evaluation and observation of the process of young people. And I think this responds to this idea of continuously negotiating the agenda with young people, with their interest, with their issues, and how they connect to the wider issues to society. So I think this is an important point that usually, like the normal evaluation, standardized, don't capture this flexibility. It's also a result of our ongoing reflection as well. And Act 2 is looking at our process, how we evaluate our process.
Yeah,
Nadia?
so here our process is informed by global youth work lens. And this is very important because it is about, and I know people hear about consciousness, but it is about provoking consciousness and intentionally and really while assisting and supporting the young people in their active engagement. And this is about founding their agency, is really that piece about comprehending the agency. This is one part, but the second part is as well about action taking. Is about what are we going to do about things that we know they are not, they are here, we could see them, we know what is happening here and there. What kind of action could we take? And even a play right that we hope will be actually performed could actually bring awareness about the issue that this specific young group had about for themselves. So in this specific one is about our process evaluation, but really under the global youth work lens, and looking at how we are actually trying to empower in the reason for really to understand the complexity of that empowering is actually, when you break it down, is just to make sure that the young people understand, listen, you have it in you, just bring it out, and we are here just to kind of help out that that aspect, but as well to understand the global aspect of it and what is happening elsewhere for other minorities, for other groups that are in the same space than themselves. So let's just look maybe at the
Nadia,
empowering shift.
Nadia, sorry, I just wanted to say, because we're a little bit running out of time, but your presentation has been great. And just to highlight, I think there's a nice segue, because I know that you're currently working with a group in Lebanon, and you are, bringing that kind of global relationship into a real connection for the young people in the LGBTI group in Cork, where they're seeing young people in Lebanon and seeing their circumstances and seeing kind of a connection with those circumstances. So, and they've gone through this amazing process with you, and it feels like it's really set them up well to be in that space, So as you said, the work here, it has repercussions, and it feeds into other spaces, into other work that you're doing. So, so thank you, Nadia and Christina. I mean, the level of detail of your process around evaluation, it just shows the depth of the work that happens in a youth workspace, that happens in a learning environment that is intentional and planned. And so I think you've given your example of that is very strong. So really, and it's political, as you said, it's political theatre, you're using strategies from Auguste Boal, Theatre of the Oppressed, and that is the underpinning what you're doing. So look, thank you both so much. And I'm sorry now to finish up the presentation, apologies, but I think the work you do is a really great example of youth work is political, and you've showcased that. So thanks so much to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great presentation as well. So listen, we're going to ask Hilary now to come in. Hilary, if you're okay to come in and just to kind of bring some of the points together from this afternoon session, to tie up some of the threads, and to reflect on your thoughts on legacy and evaluation in a youth work context.
Well, that's simple. I mean, I'm just fascinated by all the things that this afternoon, and it really goes on, it just goes to show, I suppose, that there's an appetite for these sort of conversations. And I think any one of the presentations this afternoon would sort of warrant a workshop in its own right to sort of unpack and ask questions and do all of that. So I suppose what I'll try and do is just maybe over a couple of minutes is sort of pick out some of the things that I think are particularly useful in terms of the broader conversation, and then maybe to leave a couple of minutes at the end if I can. So I have notes. So I've been taking notes for the last couple of hours, so I'm looking at those as well. But the thing that really strikes me, a couple of things, is we have to think about, when we think about evaluation, we have to link it to the purpose of evaluation. And evaluation is one of those terms, I suppose, that means different things to different people. And so I think one of the first things that we have to do is define our own terms. When we're thinking about evaluation, what is it that we mean? I mean, it's generally associated with the idea of establishing the value of something or the quality of something. But like the answer to most good questions in youth work is, it depends. So what do you mean by quality? It depends. What do you mean by value? It depends, on who you're talking to and what their position is. So I think it's really important for us to recognize, as everybody did, I think, is that evaluations are not neutral. They're often presented to us in ways that they are this objective, scientific, rational way of assessing the value of something and being able to neatly package it. And of course, it's not that. And it is, so when we think about evaluation, I think we have to think about a couple of different dimensions of it. We have to think about, there is an accountability piece to it. So that is because we are not only thinking about it in terms of funding terms, but we're also accountable to the people that we work with. We're accountable for the claims that we make about our work. If we say that our work is participatory, is emancipatory, is youth-centered, youth-led, whatever the language, we have to be willing to be accountable for that. So I think we have to broaden out our idea of accountability to not only be about money, because I think that's what we think about, because that's a lot where the anxiety is. But I also think it is about, and we saw that in the examples, from Tipperary and Cork, were very much about the development, the quality of the program, to see youth work as educational, as developmental, as iterative in some way, so that the process of evaluation and the process of the work are so inextricably linked that the work is being negotiated as we go. And so evaluation in a way on the go is a really nice way. And Yolande Wadsworth, an Australian academic and researcher, somebody I'm very fond of, she writes about, you know, everyday evaluation on the go. And she talks about that idea of just trying to build our evaluation, our evaluative sensibility into our work. And I think it sits very well for me with the idea of reflective practice. And in the small group, I was suggesting that maybe one of the really simple ways of doing it is just keeping evaluation on the agenda, in the sense of let's bring it to a meeting, you know, once a month in the staff meeting, going, so where are we at on that? What are we noticing? What do we want to do? And recording as you go, rather than waiting for these formal things that often come at the end in a bit of a rush. The other thing I think that's important is that youth work is, and has been for the last number of years in the Irish context, but not just in Ireland, globally, under a certain amount of pressure to sort of, I think you were saying, Katie, being prove itself. And we get a bit obsessed with having to prove ourselves, you know, but the improving bit is important too. But the other bit of it is about generating knowledge about our practice and sharing that knowledge about our practice and communicating something about the complexity of the work. And as we often say about youth work, the magic of the work. I've been reading recently this idea about like the black box of the youth work relationship, as if you could get in there and tinker around in that relationship and try and understand why it's so transformative, you know, in some way. But we know that something particular happens, but it doesn't happen just by accident. And what happens is owned by youth workers and young people. But more importantly, I suppose it's part of generating a knowledge about a practice that is relational and often quite either unwillingly or willingly misunderstood, because it doesn't lend itself to particular categories of accountability. The other thing that strikes me in terms of what I heard people talking about, and there's quite interesting work happening, I mean, obviously in Canada, as we've heard today, but also colleagues in the UK, Sue Cooper and Tanya de St. Croix in particular, are doing really interesting work on sort of reclaiming the ideas around measurement and challenging ideas that youth work can be measured in very technical sort of ways. And that notion, I think that both Kate and Nadia and Christina and three of you were talking about, was the notion of storytelling, really sort of placing, because evaluation to me has to relate to purpose. You know, you can't evaluate what you're not intending to do. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. So in some way, I think we have to be clear about what's our intention for the work, to try and document that in some way, and then think from the beginning, how might we evaluate that? What might we generate? And to, I suppose, open up our ideas of what constitutes evidence in those sorts of spaces. And more importantly, when we think of something as evidence, we have to be able to say evidence of what? What is this? What is this an incident of? What is it evidence of? And how can we accumulate all of those instances to tell some sort of holistic story? And that's the other thing that would strike me, is I think we really need to push back against the tendency to atomize young people into their problems and into what are seen to be either the problems of young people or the problems for young people or the problems that young people pose. And so, you know, we were talking about, and you know, this notion of that young people get referred to as what they're not. So they're NEETs, they're not in employment, education, and whatever. They're harder, they're the other. And I think we, of course, because part of the accountability thing is that often our funding is tied to those, but we can actually push back, I think, and say, okay, you want to know about that, but we'll tell you the stories of real young people leading real lives that are not atomized in that way, that young people are more than the series of what might be perceived to be the deficits. So I think we can also choose to tell alternate stories and alternative stories, as well as the stories we might feel obliged to tell in accountability terms. So I think that's one of the things that really strikes me, is that we can begin to not get lost in the gaps between the things that we say in order to get funding, because the things we say we're going to do, and if we refer to young people in those atomized sort of way, then that's what we will be obliged to account for. And so in some way, we potentially perpetuate the story of young people's deficits. So I think we have to find a very delicate balance of telling the one story that allows us to continue to exist, but also pushes back and tells much more holistic and much more hopeful stories about what it is we're trying to do, because essentially youth work is a hopeful practice. It is based on the notion that something dynamic and transformative can happen in young people's lives individually and collectively. And I really liked the idea too of the notion that we are, in terms of say global youth work, is that part of what we're trying to do in the global youth work bit is to build in that sensibility across the organization. So engaging other parts of the organization, other parts of programs into those conversations, and inviting those conversations and those evaluative conversations, and doing this together in terms of building the thing together. And the final thing that I will say is two things I'd say. One is we should always be open to be surprised in evaluation. I think we should always look to what haven't we noticed, what didn't we anticipate, and to make space for that, because that is something I think is important. And we should also try and find ways to commit to use the results. That if we don't embrace evaluation as a positive force in the work, we have a tendency to do it for the instrumental means and then park it because we're not terribly happy with it. We don't feel good about doing it in that sort of way. So I think we have to also find ways to how do we use the results for our ends to communicate the story of youth work that we want to tell, not only the stories that we feel obliged to tell for funding reasons. I could say loads more, but I'm going to stop there. I'm sure there's lots of things missing, but that's just some of what I noticed on the afternoon.
That's great, Hilary. And I suppose on that point, it feels like the research piece is part of what you're talking about as well. And, creating the analysis that supports the meaningful evaluation, and a kind of an evaluation platform that is responsive and also kind of leads and gives direction to the work, and also kind of shapes the work, and also is not solely led by funders. So the YouthWorks platform is one where we have found really interesting. But we don't know if it maps directly onto the Irish scenario, but there's certainly learning in it for us, and how we could support the sector. Did you want to say something, Hilary?
I was just going to say something, because I think one of the things we have a tendency to do is to look for the model that we can just use. Let's look for the one that we can adapt, we can take, and then we'll use that. I think the big thing for me, and I mean, I'm happy to circulate some of the links I was mentioning in terms of Sue Cooper's work and Tanya Cross's work as well. But the idea that we have to actually, I think, be willing to develop our own processes based on our understanding of the work and what works for our context and our purposes. And I think Tanya and Louise, who are doing this work in the UK, have written, I think, 3 things I want to say is, does your evaluation, I think it's really helpful. They're thinking about strategies for this notion of democratizing evaluation. And I think that's really important idea, because evaluation is about power. And it is a powerful exercise, and it can choose. It's never neutral, and it can choose to tell certain sorts of stories over other stories. So I think they have some ideas, some questions for us to ask ourselves about this notion of strategies for democratizing. So does evaluation suit the setting? So are we using the right sorts of evaluation tools for the setting that we're in? I think that's a really cool question. Does our evaluation reinforce or challenge unequal power relationships? And I'm conscious that was talked about in all of the presentations. And the other question they have is, does it capture, which I think is the bit, is both the remarkable. Sometimes when we think about evaluation, we have to think about the big things, the amazing things, but often it's the accumulation of the everyday is where the real work is to be found. So do we also evaluate what is considered to be ordinary and everyday in youth work, as well as the remarkable? So I think that's an article in Youth and Society, but I'm happy to share the link. But I think people might find it interesting that there's lots of good resources out there. And I think potentially one of the things we could do in the Irish context is draw on a multitude of resources, then create something that works in our context, rather than taking things wholesale from others and trying to make it fit. I think it's about generating our own knowledge as much as anything else. Sorry, Sally, I thought I was finished.
No, Hilary, thank you for that point. And I think it's, of course, it's a very valid point, but I think we're always kind of looking at models that exist, and we're seeing how they can be relevant to my situation. And we can certainly take aspects of something that is successful and see if it fits or can be at least adapted. But Hilary, people are saying there about your links that you mentioned there. Have you put them in already?
I'm starting to put in a couple of them there, and we can talk about them later, and I can send them on to you as well.
because I'll be sending on a follow-up email with this after the session today. Thank you so much, Hilary. We're going to close up now. Before we go though, please don't leave, because we have a Menti, which we'd love for you to fill in as part of our evaluation of today and your experiences of the session. So it's a self-directed Menti, so you can control the pace yourself. So please, I think Leah's put it into the chat there, and the invitation is to participate. And just to say that we really appreciate your coming into the space today. At the start, we had an intention that it would be a learning environment. And thank you, YouthRex, for coming today. You know, it was great, Katie, it was great to have your presentation. It was great to have your input and your context setting piece. You know, it's a really interesting model for us to look at and to consider. Great to have Kate O'Connor from Tipperary, Nadia and Christina on the project in Cork, and then to have Hilary to give us some closing comments. All of this is really helpful to our work. And yeah, we really want to kind of open up this conversation on evaluation and, you know, how we start shaping stories of change in our work, how we start reflecting actually the work that we see in the practice we're involved in, how we showcase that better and give it a better platform. So that was what the intention for today was. So thank you so much, everyone, for participating. Yeah, and we invite you to kind of reflect on what questions are you left with after today's session? What are the next steps? Yes, indeed. What are the next steps? But we will be kind of reflecting on that. Yeah, what would support you in strengthening an evaluation approach in your work? And this Menti is going to be open for the next while. So if you feel you don't have the answers today, you can also participate in that Menti after today's session. So the main thing is we would love if you did participate in it, because this is part of how we're harvesting the information for today, and to look towards the future and the idea of evaluation and creating legacy in the work. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, just really appreciate it. And we will follow up as well after today. Thank you.